Well, we're trying to drill into exactly, what's sitting behind Alan Bollard's numbers. There's partly there's a factor in there about what he thinks is the growth capacity of the economy, and that's slightly at odds with Treasury. So we're just trying to reconcile those two numbers, and Treasury are going to go away and look at their own numbers, so let's sort of wait and see. That they were the two factors. Fundamentally, he thought we'd earn less for what we were selling overseas, and the growth capacity of the economy was slightly lower. But you add those two things together, and very subtle changes have a big impact on their long-term forecasts. Now, if that meant that we were doing something materially wrong, of course the government could go and change direction, but it's not obvious to me that there's something else that other lever we could pull.
You're saying that there's no business investment of any great note in New Zealand at the moment. So your government's done everything, put everything in place ready for that recovery to happen, but it's not happening.
Yeah, he's saying quite a few different things actually from Treasury. I mean, one of the things he's saying, for instance, is that the Treasury's view, I think I've got this right way around, the Treasury's view is that we will have a decade now of muted consumption. In other words, we'll have a positive savings rate for quite a long period of time. Alan Bollard's not so convinced, for instance, of that number. He's seeing slightly less growth in balance sheets. That's why he thinks the banks are actually cutting interest rates. I mean, everyone can see that they are lending at very low rates. But I mean, you have to put it all in a bit of perspective here. I mean, that it's the governor's job to determine what interest rates are. But on the one hand, he said, well, I think the outlook's much more bleak. And on the other hand, he left interest rates on hold.
Dr. Bolland made the point actually that the lack of capacity to grow people is because of the New Zealand business was actually particularly scarred by the global financial crisis. Yeah. Is the government underestimating how badly affected New Zealand business was and how they're still carrying that scar?
Well, yes, he's made that point to us as well. I'm not 100% sure what could be done about that other than what we are doing, which is firstly the government's got its own balance sheet in order, so that should give businesses confidence that we're not going to be either taking more money out of the economy from a borrowing perspective than we otherwise would, and we've lengthened our balance sheet, so there's a lot more confidence, I think, around the health of the New Zealand borrowing program. Companies themselves have got their balance sheets back in order. I mean, generally we're advised there's a lot more cash, they've restructured their businesses, they're generally in stronger shape. I think what they are concerned about in terms of, I speak generally for companies, is it's just a very uncertain time. I mean, no one's quite sure what's happening in Europe, no one's quite sure what that means for China and Australia. Confidence levels are quite low in lots of countries, it's not unique to New Zealand.
How long can you wait before the New Zealand business sector or the private sector kicks in and starts investing? And at what point does the government have to say, we might have to do something?
Well, don't you have to take a step back and say, well, if they're not investing fast enough, what is the rationale for them not investing? And I think the arguments there are, the government needs to look at what it can do to give them confidence. Well, I think firstly, the government building infrastructure, trying to reduce compliance costs, lowering company taxes, are all initiatives that are important in terms of getting them to invest. I mean, if you look at the business confidence surveys, we had quite a number of just sort of generalised surveys. Is the government on the right track when it comes to the economy? Mood of the boardroom, for instance, before the last election. Generally speaking, they've been pretty supportive of where National's going. So we can't make them invest if they think the international environment is weak, but we can do our best to point out to them that we think we're getting in the strongest shape we can.
You've done that and you've put all those building blocks in place, but how long do you wait before you go, we've got to do something here, or we're just going to stagnate?
Well, I don't think we're in that position. I mean, in fairness, we've grown in 9 of the last 10 quarters. I mean, yes, it's been relatively anemic growth, and that reflects, this very sluggish international position. But I think before you see New Zealand companies really leaping into substantial investment, they are going to want to have more confidence about what's happening in the global economy. And they're going to want to see Europe on a stronger footing, and they're certainly going to want to see some recovery in the United States. In Europe's case, yes, but China and the United States are, China's a bit mixed, but certainly the United States is starting to show a bit more promising numbers.
Just following on from Colin's question, you're basically saying that the ball is in the court of the private sector for the next move in terms of...
Well, I think his question is there some magical lever that the government can pull? And I think the answer to that is, I don't think there is something we can do in the very, very short term.
Well, you could build more roads, you could
Well, We're doing a fair bit of that. I mean, I think the private sector are taking quite a lot of confidence in what the government's doing. Speeding up things like the RMA and things are really important because they'll help them. But I think, it's just like New Zealand consumers are currently saving and have been for the last 3 years. It's a reflection on a slightly different anticipated environment. There's just a degree of uncertainty in the minds of businesses and consumers.